Welcome to the New Books Network.
My name is Dr. Zachary Williams. I am host for the New Books Network. And today I want to warmly welcome Elaine Weiss, who's a journalist and author whose work has been recognized from numerous different sectors in our society, Society of Professional Journalists. And her byline has appeared in many national publications. She's the author of a number of very influential works of narrative history, the highly acclaimed narrative, The Woman's Hour, The Great Fight to Win the White House, which was hailed as a riveting, nail-biting political thriller, with, of course, parallels to our time today. But we're here today to speak with her about her newest work, also a very needed and influential work of narrative scholarship, Spell Freedom, The Underground Schools That Built the Civil Rights Movement. And it has received a good bit of acclaim from a number of different scholars, and thought leaders who themselves have produced great work. And first, let me just, give some, quick notes on it, and just, Elaine, just again, welcome you and ask if you could just then talk about your work and how you come to conceptualize the project and how you went about writing it and some of the major themes and ideas. But, usually when we're talking about disruptors and interrupters, we're talking about, what's happening in neighborhoods and communities. And oftentimes there's a lot of conversation about interrupters helping to address, social, systemic issues in communities and neighborhoods. But you speak about a time in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s where there's a group of disruptors, an unlikely group of disruptors who participate in what we characterize as good trouble. Septima Clark, a grandmotherly Black South Carolina school teacher. Esau Jenkins, a striving Sea Island businesswoman. Bernice Robinson, characterized as a vivacious Charleston beautician. And Myles Horton, who was self-proclaimed radical hillbilly. A time where we're talking about hillbilly elegy and all the other political connotations that brings. But how did this group of unlikely, ordinary, average, everyday citizens with extraordinary resilience in the summer of 1954 at the Highlander Folk School put together a training center basically that transformed and revolutionized not only the civil rights era, but also American history as we know it. And again, welcome. If you could just talk to us about your work and its significance and how you came about writing it, that would be wonderful. It would be great.
Sure, Zach. Thank you for having me. I'm really, really pleased to be here with you. I like to write pieces of our American history, as hard and difficult as they may be, that people have ignored to some extent. And I'm not saying scholars have ignored it, but I think the general public doesn't know about it. And I think it's extremely important that we tell these stories, that we tell them factually, that we gather what information we can to tell these stories that are sort of in the background of our understanding of social movements. So my previous book, The Woman's Hour, was about how women fought for 7 decades to win the right to vote. And this book, Spell Freedom, I see it almost as a sequel, very different story, but as a sequel, it's the next great fight to perfect our democracy, to retrieve voting rights for Black citizens in the southern states. And so I wanted to write about this because as I went around the country speaking about the women's suffrage movement, I would often be confronted with very valid questions. Well, that's fine, but wasn't this just for white women? Wasn't the 19th Amendment just for white women? And I would say, no, that is not correct. It was not just for white women. But in the southern states, there was state law, not federal law. There was state law that prohibited, Jim Crow laws, that prohibited and suppressed white women's vote, just as those laws prohibited and suppressed and intimidated Black men voting after they had won the vote with the 15th Amendment in 1870. So this was not a new story that in the South, what was constitutional rights would be attacked and would be prevented. And so I wanted to look at that, what happened in between, and found the story of the Highlander Folk School, which, again, some people know about who study social movements. Many do not. I did not know about it, but it is this amazing, small, it's not a school. It was called the Highlander Folk School at that time. It's now called the Highlander Center for Education and Research. And it's not a school like we think of a school. It is more of I'd say, a think tank, a retreat center, a um, meeting place, a strategy center. And it was established pardon me, in 1932 during the Depression by Myles Horton, that radical hillbilly, a white man, a white liberal Southerner, who wanted to help his neighbors. And so I found the story, and then I found the story within Highlanders history of the citizenship schools. And I got very excited because I realized this would allow me to tell the story of the civil rights movement from a really different angle. It's not the story of brilliant orators and ministers, though they are certainly in there. Dr. King is in there all through. Um, it's not the story of fiery, radical, not so radical, fiery, um, young students, John Lewis and James Bevel and all the SNCC uh, soldiers. It's a story of what happened on the ground. It's a story of ordinary middle class and poor people who had been agitating in their communities for decades. You know, the movement didn't just spring up. There was a foundation laid by very brave people who had everything to lose, everything. And many of them did lose everything. And I was able to find the story of these four disruptors, as you describe them, and I like to describe them, who came out of the interwar, the 20th century Black civil rights movement. They are NAACP stalwarts. They are on Myles Horton's side, a white man. He's part of the whole liberal establishment of wanting change. So of course they're all called communists. But what I wanted to do was to place these ordinary people within what we know the framework of the civil rights movement and show how they prepared the nation for it. They pushed it forward. They really got the ground troops, the people who made the movement, the people in the streets, the people who were signing those very dangerous legal petitions to desegregate schools, or who are lining up to try to register to vote. Those people, how did those people enter the movement? And the answer in so many situations in so many communities was through these citizenship schools. And so when I came upon that story, I realized that I could tell the story differently, give us a new perspective on what the civil rights movement meant to ordinary people and what sacrifices they were willing to make to defend democracy.
It's an extraordinary story, and grateful that you pulled together all those different narratives and stories and experiences, because it's interesting where some of the most influential and sort of profound experiences start, and how they come together. Oftentimes we're looking for the extraordinary figures and times and moments and experiences, but oftentimes it comes from the most average, ordinary, everyday occurrences, conversation, and this sort of congealing of people. It's fascinating that it happens in a rundown shack or building in the back of a grocery store, and the conversations, that Aaron trained everyday ordinary citizens to read and write, and also to vote. As you're saying, it doesn't happen, from nowhere. It happens, through a lot of, sweat, tears, blood, and efforts, thought, work, invisible labor, as people may say today, to help, to give space for people to think and to talk and to create together collectively. And
Mhm.
from this, you have so much that comes from you. You call this group the organizational backbone of the civil rights movement, but oftentimes that goes, maybe against the narrative where it's only a feature on particular figures. But it takes all of that together to bring about what comes. And it's interesting about the power of literacy. As you're saying, as a form of liberation,
Mhm.
to give people space to talk about. If you could talk about that and how that sort of formative process of everyday people being changed and transformed into, as you would say, a cadre, and like, sort of, because it is a battleground, a cadre of folk who then mobilize together and organize and help to change everything. I mean, but it begins with literacy and how that has sort of creative, conjuring sort of character.
Great. Let me set the stage, Zach, for how this happens. Um, in the 1940s, uh, black many black men came back from service in World War II, and then in the early 50s in Korea, and they're dissatisfied. They're they were just fought for their country, and they're treated like dirt when they come back. And it's no coincidence that the movement begins after these men return with such really disappointment in their own nation and determined to make it better. And they're the ones who are initiating petitions to desegregate schools that eventually end up as the Brown decision. And so the reader really goes through what happened before the Brown decision, who did this, how did they do it. But the citizenship schools that the book chronicles are really that sense of literacy. The way it starts is my four characters, as you mentioned. So Septima Clark, veteran school teacher. She's 56 years old when the book opens in 1954. She's been teaching elementary and middle school students for 40 years. And she's an NAACP activist, but she once the Brown decision comes down, she realizes she wants to mobilize her community. And she goes to a workshop at the Highlander Center, and she's just blown away. This is a place that's integrated in the Deep South, in the Tennessee mountains. It's totally illegal by Tennessee law. They're flaunting it. People eat together. They sleep in the same dormitory rooms, racially mixed. They swim together in the pond. They sing together. This is totally, uh, you know, going against the Jim Crow laws. And she's just mesmerized, like this is the future. And she goes back to Charleston, her hometown, and gets some of her NAACP executive board members to come to Charleston. One of them is a Sea Island businessman, this magnificent man named Esau Jenkins. He has 8 children. He has a lot of small businesses because he believes a Black man has to be independent of the white economic structure, and then he's freer. He's a civic leader. He's head of the PTA. He's head of his church board. He's just a man who works for his neighbors. And he realizes that they have no political power. It's a majority Black Sea Island off the coast of Charleston, but it could be on the moon. It is so remote. It's only 15 miles away, but it's so remote. It's so neglected. It's so impoverished. And most of his neighbors are illiterate. And he said, we will never be able to achieve anything, get the white establishment to give us electricity until we have the vote, until can pressure them, the people in charge. And so one of his businesses is he runs a bus, a little jitney bus that goes between the island and Charleston every morning and evening, taking workers who work in the factories or domestics, work in the shipyards. And he decides that he has this captive audience. And so he lectures them on democracy and on the meaning of being a citizen and how important it is to vote. And part of the voting registration process imposed on Blacks, but not whites, in South Carolina and the other states is the literacy test. And they have to not only read and write, but also interpret the state constitution. Very obscure, legalistic language. I mean, most of us could not do it. But they're supposed to be able to do it. So he has his wife type up the South Carolina Constitution. He passes it out to his passengers on the bus and they discuss it. And those who could read kind of learn to sound it out so they could do it on the test. Those who can't memorize it. And then he takes them to the registrar, which is usually open like 2 hours every month. And he slowly gets them a few, first 5, then 10, then 20 registered. He has about 100 registered on the island when he goes to Highlander with Septima Clark in the summer of 1954. And he brings this idea to Highlander and says, I need help. I can't teach them to really read. They're memorizing. But it's giving them hope and it's giving them a sense of purpose. And they all become part of my progressive club where it's a citizens club and we discuss the issues and we discuss candidates and we really learn to become part of the process. And Myles Horton realizes this is a very interesting concept. And so through the next year or two, they develop this curricula, which Septima Clark writes it as the master teacher, to teach literacy, not only aimed at getting them to pass the literacy test and be able to register to vote, but also to give them a sense of personal achievement. Because many of these people are in their 50s, 60s, 70s. They've been deprived of a decent education by the segregated system, which is not funded. It's an agricultural community. The kids have to go into the fields. They can't go to school for many months of the year. So they're really very intelligent, but deprived of education. And so they get Bernice Robinson, that vivacious beautician, and beauty parlors and barbershops, as you know, are really important parts of the community as organizing centers. And she agrees to become the first teacher. She's never taught a class in her life. And she says, what do you want to learn? And they say they want to sign their names. They want to read the Bible. They want to pass the registration test for voters. And she begins, there's a scene in the book where at the first lesson, she tries to get them to learn to hold a pencil because most of them have not ever had to hold a writing instrument. They speak Gullah on the island. And so they've been able to manage without being able to read or write. And so there's a scene where these people, men and women, who have done manual labor and their fingers are so strong, their hands are so strong, and they're trying so hard and they're so eager and they're gripping the pencil so tightly that all you hear is snaps, the wood snapping all around the room as the pencils break in their hands. And she thinks to herself, what am I going to do? And then she just says, here's more pencils. We have lots of pencils. Don't worry. And they learn to trace their names and they learn the alphabet. And Bernice describes this moment when a 65-year-old woman can recognize the letters of her name on the blackboard. But besides the literacy, which gives them a sense of personhood, which is they've been robbed of most of their lives, it also teaches the Constitution of the United States, which is tacked up on the wall. It teaches the UN Declaration of Human Rights. It says you are a human, you are a citizen, you're entitled to every right that white people have, and you can demand it. And this gives this awakening. It's a political and a personal awakening. It's something that Septima Clark describes as being ready from within.
Right.
It's really a spiritual awakening, being ready from within. You are ready to take hold of the rights and responsibilities of being a citizen, and you are ready to demand it. And these schools, the first one is built on Esau's Island, in the back of a grocery store, behind the grocery shelves, and it's in a hidden room with no windows. And Septima Clark says, we purposely did it that way because we didn't want white people to know what we were doing. And the first class succeeds, and they all are able to register. And people start saying, oh, I'm going to enroll in this too. And it moves from more island citizens want it. So it spreads on the Sea Islands, then it goes into Charleston, then it goes to Savannah, and soon it's mushrooming all over. But these classes, again, are not in brick and mortar schools. As you said, they're in the back of grocery stores. They're at kitchen tables. They're in beauty parlors and barbershops after hours with the curtains closed. They're in funeral parlors when they're not being used. And they're in mechanics garages. They're kept underground, which is why I call it that. They're kind of quietly because they don't want to rouse white anger. And after the Brown decision, what we see, and this was one of the most startling and disturbing parts of my research, you see the white communities organize themselves into vicious committees and organizations, the White Citizens Councils, which exerted economic ruin on those who tried to desegregate their schools or register to vote or in any way help organize the Black community. If you attempted to register, just attempted, I'm not saying you succeeded because the registrar would just throw it out anyway. But if you even attempted, in many cases, especially in rural areas, by the time you got home from this endeavor, the white registrar, would have called your employer, and you'd be immediately fired from your job, and so would your wife or husband, and so would your relatives, fired and blackballed, so that you would not be hired by anyone in the vicinity. The registrar would have called your landlord, and you'd be evicted. The white pharmacy would not fill the prescription for your sick child. The bank would pull your mortgage for your truck. The lumber mill would not mill your lumber or gin your cotton. And if you owned a gas station, many Black entrepreneurs own gas stations, they'd pull out the tanks. They would pressure the national companies to do this. And at the state level, there were commissions, sort of segregation preservation commissions, which had the governor was often the head of it, and it worked with the legislature to pass onerous laws outlawing the NAACP. Septima Clark gets fired from her job after 40 years of service, and she loses her pension because she refuses to renounce her membership in the NAACP. And civil servants in the state of South Carolina and many other southern states could not keep their jobs and still be members of the NAACP. We see echoes of this right now, and it really frightens me. But it was horrible then, and it's horrible now. But we see the seeds of that. It starts at the top, these citizens' councils, and there were thousands of them. The mayor was part of it. Your city and state representatives were part of it. All the top lawyers and bankers and doctors and ministers were part of these organizations. And they were fascist, oppressive, official organizations. And at the state level, they were taxpayer funded. Louisiana, I hate to say, was one of the worst in this. But they had some state segregation commission that was called the I think it's the Legislative Commission to Preserve the Peace. So you get an idea of what that means.
Mm.
The status quo. So these citizenship schools mushroom all over the lowland.
Yeah, it's interesting, yes.
And then they Highlander is attacked as being communist, and it's investigated. There are sham trials. Myles Horton is, dragged out of hearing rooms. Finally, the state of Tennessee closes them down, just pronounces that they're guilty, auctions off all their property, arsonists burn the rest down. They have to move, and they actually do move. They're out of their former home near Chattanooga. They move up to Knoxville, where they still exist and are in the 93rd year of going on 94 years of training activists. But what this means is the citizenship school program, which has been so successful, and these graduates and their volunteer teachers, the teachers are from the community. Your mom would become a teacher. She'd go to Highlander and get trained by Septima Clark for a week in a workshop, intensive workshop, how to do this, how to buy the pencils, what the curriculum is, and then how to organize your students into a citizens club afterwards that would continue. And so these are not strangers. These are not college kids coming from the north. These are your trusted neighbors. And that's really effective. That's important. It's not strangers coming in and being condescending. It's people who understand you. And so thousands of people are being educated with this, and they don't want to lose it if Highlander can't survive. And so the program transfers to Dr. King's very new Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And Septima Clark moves to Atlanta, and she works with Andrew Young, who's 26 years old, a young minister, never taught in his life, but he becomes her boss, and Dorothy Cotton, who does have a master's degree in education. And they work together as a team, and they administer this program. One of the first things they do is they jump into Dorothy's car, and they make this road trip through the South, looking, as they call it, for PhD minds with third grade educations. And these will be the teachers that they will recruit to come and train. But they're also community leaders. So the people who they tap, and Septima had this incredible eye for potential leaders, and they could be domestic maids, but she can see that they could lead their community. And so they're trained not only to become citizenship school teachers, but to become local organizers. And these are the people who, when Dr. King comes to town, will make the population ready to join the movement. So you see this growth from the ground up, not from Dr. King down. And I think that's a really important, not to say this is the first time this has been charted, but it's through these, you travel through the movement with a school teacher, a beautician, a businessman, and this white guy who helps them.
Yeah, I agree with, what Dr. Carol Anderson said about your work and how you combine masterful storytelling and poignant scholarship and narratives about everyday people, and how, what the obstacles and odds that they were against. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the totality of the system of Jim and Jane Crow, yet the incredible resilience and fortitude and creativity, and just perseverance is amazing. It does fall in the larger tradition of, the Hull House initiative and freedom schools and churches and other initiatives. But it's extraordinary when you look at the bracket years of the 30s to the 60s, the sort of centerpiece of the struggle for civil and human rights. And in that era, what Dr. Hanson would talk about in her work, the 40s and 50s, where we took the eyes off the prize. Where she talks about in her work, where there was an opportunity around the time of World War II and its aftermath to really construct the kind of egalitarian, multiracial, rights-based, social contract kind of society that, we purported to be and envision for America. And while still having that particular opportunity at home and abroad, and that linkage allowing America to become global Americans, there's this, this pushback, but there's this continued, effort on the part of everyday people to forge ahead. And I'm glad that you're telling that story and that narrative, because we, again, in our search for superheroes to come and save us, we're looking for, people who are like of extraordinary, and superhuman potential, but it's average, ordinary people that are the mobilizers and the as you said with regard to Septima Clark, finding the PhDs who have the ability, but have oftentimes, because of systems, not been allowed to reach their full maturation. All that to say, what lessons can we learn today in this era of banned books and attacks against DEI in universities and colleges, and even the thought of American history being as it has materialized and matriculated? What lessons can we learn for voting rights, and how can your work and the work of the incredible group of people that you talk about, how can that inform and inspire and motivate people in this time, where, as you talked about earlier, we're facing, sort of ever increasing, attacks and surveillance and retrenchment that does mirror the McCarthy era, but it's on a whole nother level. So what can your work speak to our times and our era?
Well, Zach, when I started research on this book in 2019, before the pandemic, and during the research and writing, I wanted to bring the story to the fore, because I thought historically it was really important, and emphasizing these, as you say, ordinary, extraordinary people was a very important part of our understanding of our history. And I also wanted, and again, was very, very disturbed and wanted other people to understand the kind of violence, economic violence, physical violence, psychological violence that was perpetrated on, again, teachers, farmers, businessmen and women. And I wanted to bring that story vividly to life through personal stories. But what I did not and could not, and I'm glad I did not know, was that the book would land just in this moment of renewed oppression, renewed racist language and policy coming not from the states necessarily, though several of them are doing that quite vigorously, but from our own federal government, which during this story is really on the right side of history. And it's a battle with the recalcitrant states. We've flipped that script, and now it's the federal government who is imposing this sense of retreat and of backlash and of vengeance. And, I often, when I speak to audiences about the book these days, I give a warning, and I say, look, this story clicks all the boxes of forbidden words, supposedly forbidden words and concepts. This is a book proudly about Black history. It's a book about women in history. It's a book about voting rights. It's a book about inclusion. It's a book about democracy, all these things that the current regime seems to be very frightened about. And so, I say, look, if you don't want to be part of this, then maybe this isn't the presentation for you. But you're right that there are important lessons to be learned from this story. And part of it is that the struggle for democracy doesn't end. It didn't end, with the writing of the Constitution. It didn't end with the 13th, 14th, 15th, 19th Amendments. It didn't end with the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act. And we see how those come about, and we see how pressure from not only the demonstrations, but the grassroots foundation of the movement, which we see forming throughout this book, really forced the hand of federal government to do this. So I think the lessons are that we have kind of abandoned the idea of creating citizens, of teaching citizenship in the school. It's sort of rare, I understand, that citizenship classes or units are still included in social studies and history. It was in my generation. I think it's not as common now. And I think we are reaping the disadvantages of abandoning that, of saying there's no room in the curriculum to teach citizenship. And I don't mean what the president is now saying about this patriotic history, which is BS. I'm talking about, how does government work? How does your local government work? How does your state government? How does our national government? If we don't understand how a democratic government is put together, and what the checks and balances are, and how a bill is passed, and whether it's in your town council or in Congress, if you don't understand that, then everything's a sort of black hole. And it's mysterious how government works and how policy is made. And if that's so, then all these kind of crazy conspiracy theories about deep state and about, expertise or whatever can take root, because there's no foundation of knowledge. If you don't understand how the earth revolves around the sun, you can believe the earth is flat. I mean, you can, if you don't understand basic concepts, then we're leaving the door open for ignorance and perhaps superstitions to enter. And I think we're seeing that. I think people don't understand why the current regime is a very dangerous affront to our democracy. And I think people don't understand how Congress is not doing its job, because it is a co-equal partner. And so things are just kind of floating along. And even before January of 2025, there was just, I think, a general blasé ignorance of how government works, what are the rights of the citizen and what are the responsibilities. So I think teaching that both at the student level and adult level would be useful. Literacy is still a real problem in our nation, and I think the advantages of adult literacy education and making sure our kids come out with a good basis of literacy is very important for democracy. Otherwise, you can be misled. Teaching critical thinking skills, so that they can, when they look at social media or online things, they can begin, it's getting harder to discern what's real, what's not, what's propaganda. But I think we also have to realize that this fight for equal rights, this fight for democracy goes on. It doesn't end with even great victories. It has to be sustained. And I think we have to stand up and defend it, just like the people I write about. I think they are the true patriots of American history. We hear a lot about patriotic history, and we're going to celebrate the patriots. And I'd say that the people I write about, the the farmers, the teachers, the poor people, the beauticians I write about are true patriots of American democracy. And at one point, in the 1950s, Septima Clark puts together a little brochure at Highlander called Champions of Democracy. And she highlights, again, little stories about people she knows who have stood up and are fighting this fight and are, again, they risk everything and many lose everything. They lose their jobs, they lose their careers. Families are broken up because the father has to go find work in another state. I think chronicling the everyday losses that I do in the book is really important, that we understand it's not just the terrible assassinations. It's not just the beatings on the Pettus Bridge. It's the everyday violence um, and pressure. And I think one of the lessons from this book is we have to, in our own ways, stand up. And whether, I want to bring this story to as broad an audience as I can, students, teachers, policymakers, because I think once they recognize that a woman school teacher in her mid 60s is taking buses all around the southern states constantly to find teachers and then training them to lift up their neighbors. I think once you read that story, you can't just settle back and feel comfortable that you've, signed an online petition. It's not enough. And it's not enough to even march. It's really cultivating that sense of agency and that sense through knowledge of what democracy means. So, citizenship schools, I'll sign up to teach. Community groups that study issues and study the candidates. We've had them in the League of Women Voters actually does a good job of that, but it's not reaching, into the broader population. The citizenship schools was meant for the broader population. And so that's one of the lessons I think I've learned.
Powerful. And it speaks so much to, again, that, as you say, that sort of cultivation of minds, thoughts, and hearts with everyday people, and how we're all everyday people, irrespective of our position or association or whatever. And just remembering that as we talk about, birthright citizenship and also citizenship as it matures, and how to continue to reignite and reinvigorate, a democracy and citizenship, and to try to help broaden it to be inclusive. We can still say that word to all of those who, may fall under its banner, which was supposed to be the sort of promise that our nation was to fall heir to. And again, going back to Dr. Henson, I love how your work talks about the power of grassroots civic education and a belief in the people and democracy. And in one of the other questions I want to ask as we continue to talk and hopefully begin to bring it to a close is to, do we still, Elaine, believe as a society and as a world? And you mentioned so amazingly how everyday people in different walks of life, were under incredible pressures, yet still believed, still were resilient and determined, and were able to make a way out of no way, to find ways, even with the most hostile obstacles and environments and situations and contexts, to not only dream, but to, give resonance to that, and even take ordinary practices and activities and to utilize those as vehicles and mechanisms for change, but also to tap into not only that thought consciousness of people, but the experiences and the full spectrum and gamut of emotions that people were going through, to be able to utilize all of that, much as, housewives and domestic workers would do in cooking in families and also at their home in a segregated separatist society, so finding ways to take everything and use it as a form of participatory education, but also to mobilize and operationalize around it. But a lot of it is instilled with this belief, this belief in bringing forth that which either doesn't exist or or under insurmountable odds, believing that there is a way, and then continuing to persevere until it becomes fashioned reality. If you could just speak to that, because I think that's a second part to your very important response to what can be done now. But how about the power of belief in helping to bring about a multiracial democracy? I mean, what does that require from the lessons of the Highlander Folk School?
Yeah, absolutely. The resilience, the belief, the commitment that I found in these stories, and whether it's Septima Clark, who has 2 heart attacks while she's engaged in this, but won't slow down. She wears orthopedic shoes to tromp through towns and cities and find these leaders. She would just embed herself, stay in a rundown black motel, and just kind of sit in the barber shop and listen to what people were talking about and who was doing what. Um, or the gas station owner in Western Tennessee comes back from the war, dissatisfied, wants a better world for his children, organizes some of his neighbors to go vote, and they do go vote. And the registrar says, "This is a white primary. Get out of here." Of course, those were illegal. And he says, "No, we're going to vote." And Septima Clark was there. They opened citizenship schools, and they do vote in the 1960 election. And the entire community, like 200 people who voted, and then their families and children, are evicted from their sharecropper shacks and have to live for more than a year in tents in mud. It was called Tent City. It became actually quite well known. There were lots of articles. Jet did a great series on them at the time. Pete Seeger sang a song about them at fundraisers. The auto workers sent trucks down with food and medical supplies. They lived in Tent City, but not one of them took their names off the registration rolls. That is a belief in democracy that just brought me to tears. And I think that sense, some of it is a religious sense. Many of the people, all 4 of my main characters are people of faith, and truly believe that God is in everyone, and equality is part of the natural world. And this is the American Jim Crow system is not natural, and are willing to fight against it. But in some cases, I don't know where this well of fortitude that they tap, being beaten down again in different ways, maybe not physically, but losing their jobs. There's a scene in the book where Esau Jenkins loses one of his sons who's in the military, and he comes back and he says, "Well, now I have more to fight for here because my son gave his life for democracy." And you go, wow. But I'm not saying that everyone needs or wants to sacrifice like that. But the people I'm writing about, and then the broader community that they work with, truly believe in equality and democracy. And they believe that is what God wanted, what the founders wanted, what people want. And we become stronger with that sense of inclusion. I think, the birthright citizenship, you could read it eloquently in Professor Martha Jones' books about that. The idea of promise. America was founded on promise of we're all immigrants except for those who were here before us. But most of us are all immigrants, whether by choice or by force. We need to include everyone to have a strong democracy. And the idea of the citizenship schools was to fortify on both a personal level that liberation begins in the mind. That was one of this. Liberation begins in the mind. When you come to understand your rights and your role in the world and in the nation, or your possible role, then you can start reaching for it, both individually and in community. And community was really important to this. These were not individuals going out. They were part of a community. And Dorothy Cotton describes opening a training session for potential teachers, and she said we would always sing. We'd sing at the beginning of every class, and just as they sang at Highlander. And one of the songs they sang at Highlander that was considered for a long time just the Highlander anthem that they sang every night was a song that had come to them through striking women, Black women who worked in a cigar factory in Charleston. They'd taken a Baptist hymn and they'd kind of tweaked it, and they sang it every night at Highlander because it was such a beautiful, powerful song. And then Highlander people taught it to the SNCC sit-in students, and then they taught it to the Freedom Riders, and they taught it at the first campaigns. And Pete Seeger took it up north, and the song was "We Shall Overcome." And Dr. King hears it for the first time at Highlander in the summer of 1957. And said, wow, that song really sticks with you. But again, it's part of the preparation. It's not just learning your rights. It's a sense when you sing, you're part of a community. There's strength in your melded voices. And so singing becomes a really big part of the movement. And it's taught in the citizenship schools too. And then Dorothy Cotton says, and we would talk about democracy, and we'd talk about all the ways we'd been oppressed and all the times we'd been belittled and times we'd been, made to grovel, and how that hurt us. And so it's this sort of cathartic, being able to talk openly, probably for the first time, about what had been happening, what life was like for a Black person in the South. And this becomes part of the journey towards citizenship. So it's on so many levels. And she said, and then we'd bring the spirit, and we'd feel the spirit, and then people would say, I'm not afraid anymore. Wow. So again, fear, real fear, they had lots to fear. And they overcome it as, personally and in a group. And so there is this spiritual dimension that's not just the ministers giving beautiful sermons. It's internal. Yes. And that's part of the citizenship training is this internal. They teach Black history, which was never included in the curricula in schools. And so they're reading Langston Hughes, they're learning about heroes of Black history. And suddenly this whole part of America is illuminated for them. They're learning to take pride in an important, essential part of American culture that had kind of been put in the background, which of course is what's happening right now.
Yes.
Makes me so angry. But I think that resilience has lots of different aspects. It's physical, it's mental, it's spiritual, and it's political. I mean, there are political awakening happens when they realize that to have power, you have to stand up as a citizen. And that's why you see those demonstrators willing to do this, even though they know they're going to be beaten, willing to do this non-violently. I mean, everything was non-violent. Mm-hmm. And there was a whole, as you know, a portion of the movement that said, this Charles Cobb wrote a book called "This Nonviolence Can Get You Killed." Why should they be nonviolent when they're being met with violence? But all that said, it was a total immersion in democracy and in individual and collective responsibility. So um, I I still marvel at how they were able to do this. A
Well,
soldier, we think of a soldier being brave and
yeah.
absolutely and willing to make the ultimate sacrifice, and of course many have. And but this was a different kind of voluntary bravery.
Yes, it's incredible. We marvel at how you have put together, such a narrative that is, Howard Thurman would say, with head, heart, and in such a way to characterize the head, the heart, the spirit and passion of a people that really, is emblematic of what citizenship education and civic education is. They embodied it in thought,
Mhm.
word, and deed, but also in spirit and in other ways, and in material, reality as they, labored. It was a labor of love and also of struggle and resilience. And that is so profound in our time, and arguably what we need to hear. And so your work is very timely to be able to sit with, and, as Thurman would also say in Mentoring King and others, the sound of the genuine, and also to people like Alice Walker, who were inspired as students at Spelman, hearing talks about this. They said this internal work, in nurturing that, the psychological, the mental, the cerebral, but also the sort of the ethos, and the
Mhm.
the sort of whatever, the unseen, as people would say in different spheres, to talk about what goes into making a citizen, and even a
Mhm.
soldier, citizen soldier, or and even someone who will mature and contribute to a society and democracy. So perhaps in this incubator space that we are now, the incubatory work of that school, and knowing about how it comes about, is as vital in terms of a process approach as the ingredients, the contents, which are all taken together. It's like it's intellectual and soul food. And so you have really, bequeathed to us a very special and vital and needed and necessary work for such a time as this. And so we're grateful for your labor and your work, and your passion for this story as well, because it will then, I think, yield benefit for all of us. And of course, through a lot of the reviews that have been given, it's already, but there may be even more to come in terms of how it may inspire people to, come alive, another reference to Thurman, and to become all what we can be. And then the projects and the programs and the infrastructure and the institutions will come from that. But the first piece is the literacy, liberation of literacy, but also having space to be, who we are at our wildest, most, broadest, and thoughtful, and hopeful, and even, uh, that which can be, conflicting or confusing at times, because we're living in times like that. We have to try to make sense of all of that and process all of that we're experiencing, because all that does provide fodder and fuel and source material for what we can make and create together. So thank you so very much. And if you could just tell us what you're working on next, we would love to hear it. And just to know, where you're going from here with your work.
Well, I'm not started a new work yet. I devote a year or so in each of my books to be out there and to m- make sure people understand what it is and bring it to them. I'm hoping that the people who are watching and listening to this, your audience, will bring that to their organizations, to their schools, their universities. I think having college students read this would be really important. Um, Again, organizations from uh, equality organizations to literacy organizations to citizenship, I think could really rally around this and have very thoughtful discussions within their membership. So I'm trying to be out there as much as possible, giving talks, doing these interviews, because I want to spread it. I want people to understand this isn't kind of dry history. It's not a textbook. You will live through the movement. You'll sweat and bleed with these people, and you'll come away with some new heroes, new patriots, new sense of the strength of America is acknowledging our mistakes, our grave mistakes, and then ways we have tried to address it and tried to heal. That's and the most important part of our history. And to neglect that or to deny it or to whitewash it is very dangerous and also just saps our strength. Overcoming it takes as much more strength than just accepting what's given to us. So that's what I'm doing right now. And I look forward to talking to more audiences, being invited to universities, to organizations, and bringing this story, because I think it can, from what I'm hearing from my readers, and I hope you can attest to it, it really does sort of spark something inside. You read this and say, wow, they did this. I need to do something. That's what I'm dedicating the near future to.
Well, we want to thank you so very much for joining us on New Books Network and sharing with, our audience and our community and our space, your extraordinary work and its incredible narrative and lessons. And we hope that all of that will come true. And we're sure that it will, that colleges and universities will be reading your work, and the general public, broader public, people in, groups and organizations and efforts around the country and around the world, will be inspired and be, encouraged and, and will look to gain insight from your work. So, we just want to thank you so very much. And you're a gift, and your work is a gift to us in times like these. So, thank you so much. And we wish you all the best, and we'll look forward to following your work, from here. So thank you so very much.
Back. Great pleasure to be with you.